People are right when they call the weather a creature with a truly unpredictable character, much like a human being with capricious whims. This is what has led to the idiotic situation over the recent mood swings of the weather. But perhaps it was best to start at the beginning. This day was no different from hundreds of previous ones, gray routine, crammed to the brim with chores and worries. I was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, unable to even go out for a simple and much-needed smoke break. And to top it all off, Kelly Sanders, my wife, called me to share the happy news of her father's great-uncle's wedding. Apparently something else in this tangled and utterly boring family tree made her happy, but she didn't invite me. She didn't even mention the possibility of traveling together. Not that I really wanted to go. The last family reunion had ended in a heated argument with her in-laws that I didn't want to repeat. So once Kelly confirmed her plans to go, I went back to my interrupted workday. The hours dragged on as I tried to focus on the endless list of tasks in front of me. It was one of those days when it seems like time is dragging agonizingly slow, but there's no way I can get everything done that needs to be done. The workload was relentless, and its boring monotony made me feel like I was suffocating in a sea of mediocrity. I longed for something, anything to break the cycle, even though I had no idea what awaited me. That evening, as I walked home, I wasn't alone. Emily, an old acquaintance from Ashwood, joined me. We were friendly, but I wouldn't call her a friend. We'd known each other for years, but our paths crossed only rarely. Emily had always been charming in her own way, with her sharp wit and a smile that could disarm even the coldest heart. We walked side by side, made small talk, but there was an underlying tension between us that neither of us directly addressed. That's when the unpredictable weather played its cruel trick. Despite optimistic weather forecasts, no one promised rain, but it came anyway, halfway to my apartment. In an instant, we were soaked and looked like shipwrecked people. The rain poured down thickly, soaking us to the bone. We rushed to my apartment. It was the nearest shelter, and stumbled inside as the water spilled over the floor around us. Like a gentleman, I handed Emily my towel and offered her the use of the bathroom to keep warm. The whole situation seemed surreal. Here we were, two drenched people seeking shelter from the elements, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. What I hadn't expected was for her to come out wrapped in nothing but a tight towel that barely covered her breasts and thighs. "Sorry, I couldn't find a robe in the bathroom," she said, her eyes playful. I had to step outside. Her hands rested on her hips and her eyes were fixed on me with an expression I was almost afraid to react to. There was a sense of boldness in her gaze, as if she was testing the limits of the unspoken bond that existed between us. I swallowed hard, a nervous lump forming in my throat. "I'll get you something more appropriate," I managed to say, but as I moved past her, my hand accidentally grazed her arm. The towel, already hanging precariously, slid even lower, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. My heart raced in my chest as I looked up at her. She gave me a knowing smile. Emily stepped closer, her lips curled in a smile. "You know, I've liked you for a long time," she whispered, her eyes stopping on mine. Her words hung in the air, laden with implication. Before I could say anything, her hands were on my shoulders, and she pressed herself against me. I hesitated, conflicting thoughts swirling in my head, but action took over it. It was as if the tension that had always been between us had sided, and suddenly there was no turning back. Everything happened in a burst of passion, in a moment that neither of us could break away from. The heat of the moment engulfed us, and the rain outside only seemed to intensify the electricity in the air. When it was over, we sat in silence, listening to the rain pounding on the windows. The weight of what had just happened came over me like a heavy blanket. I knew I'd crossed a line I'd never imagined, and there was nothing I could do about it now. The next morning, as I tried to make sense of what had happened, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. I couldn't shake the guilt that was gnawing at me, but there was something else too, the lingering excitement from the night before. I was torn between regret for betraying my wife and the undeniable excitement of what had happened to Emily. My thoughts were interrupted when Emily leaned toward me, smiling slyly. "You know, I'd hate for Kelly to find out about our little rendezvous last night," she said, and there was an unmistakable threat in her voice. "But maybe if you cooperate, no one will have to know about it." Her tone was casual, but something far more dangerous gleamed in her eyes. The change in her demeanor was unnerving, and it was clear to me that she was no longer just an old acquaintance. She was now someone who had power over me. And she knew it. Her words hung in the air, laden with subtext. I looked at her, and my pulse quickened. I realized that what had started as a reckless moment in the rain had now turned into something darker. She was dragging out my mistake, and I had no choice but to play along, at least for now. The thought of being at her mercy filled me with dread. But at the same time, I was undeniably drawn to this dangerous endeavor. It was like walking a tightrope, knowing that one false move could bring everything crashing down. As the days passed, Emily made it clear that she wasn't going to let me forget what had happened. She would send me messages at off hours. Sometimes just one word would make me remember everything. She demanded favors, small ones at first, but I knew that was just the beginning. She had a knack for making her demands seem almost reasonable, but they were always threatening at their core. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next message, the next request, the next reminder of the mistake that now bound us together. I couldn't help but feel trapped, like a puppet with strings being pulled by someone else. My relationship with Kelly had become strained, guilt eating away at me every time I looked at her. I wanted to tell her to come clean and end this nightmare, but the fear of losing everything held me back. Emily had me cornered, and she knew it. And worst of all, some part of me couldn't help but reach for her, the thrill, the danger, the sense of life I hadn't felt in years. That night, the rain brought more than just water. It brought chaos, temptation, and a mystery that now threatened to destroy everything I held dear. And as I stood there, watching Emily smile at me with a knowing look, I realized that I was in deeper trouble than I thought, and there was no easy way out.